Yeah, let's just dive in. Sweet. So this is kind of like the blockchain-y panel.
I think we're all reformed Ethereum maximalists or something like that.
Some of us are still Ethereum maximalists,
Yeah.
but yeah. But we didn't want to call it the blockchain panel because that's just boring. So we came up with something a little bit more creative. We'll talk a bit about what we mean by the elephant in the room. Yeah, we've heard a lot of stuff. Actually, I love that we're following the Ukbar stuff, right? Because that spoke very directly to like the limitations of blockchain and how Urbit kind of fixes things. So we're going to dive into that. But yeah, let's do intros first. Matt, do you want to kick off?
Why don't you tell people who you are first?
I'm Hawk from Modlex, otherwise known as Lane. Former Ethereum core developer. I've been, for the past few years, building a new blockchain called Space Mesh. Urbit fanboy. I'll kick it down to Matt. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. By way of introduction, I have an NFT embedded in my body. Find me later and tap my hand with your phone to get an NFT of my face. And every time I sleep talk at night, that is visualized by Whisper into GPT-3, into Stable Diffusion, and smashed together as an NFT in the morning. So if that's interesting to you, that tells you a lot about me. Oh, and I'm Little Fodrix on Network. But it's not up there.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Jake Brukhman. I'm Ranter Tapper on Urbit, or JBRUKH on Twitter. I'm the founder and CEO of Coin Fund, which is a crypto fund that's been investing in the decentralization space since 2015. And we've been very early investors in Urbit since 2016 and bought a Galaxy as well in 2018. So super excited about what's happening here with this network, with this platform, and would love to dive in to how Urbit relates to blockchain technology at large.
I'm Brian Crain, or Minvik Dablin on Urbit. I've been in the blockchain space for a long time. Right now, run a company called Chorus One. We run infrastructure for proof-of-stake networks, so around 35 different proof-of-stake chains. I also have this podcast called Epicenter, which I think at this point is like the longest running crypto podcast.
His voice should be very familiar to you guys.
And in 2017, I did a podcast with Galen about Urbit. So I've been aware of Urbit since then and really loved the idea, but wasn't sort of sure if this was actually going to work, and it didn't feel tangible. But then sort of over the last 2 years, I started feeling this is actually going to happen, and there's a lot of progress. So now we've also become involved in Urbit with our company Chorus One. We built an Urbit team and are working on building infrastructure for Urbit and hosting for Urbit.
No way, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Sweet. Yeah, so I thought it would be fun to start by asking the question, like, what initially attracted you to Urbit? Especially, again, given that we're all coming from kind of like sort of the crypto world, and I guess maybe like why are you still here? Why are you here, Brian? Why are you here?
So I think one thing that attracted me a lot to Urbit in the beginning was this idea that today we interact with different applications, and those applications, the user interface and how they're being shown, like how they behave, is controlled by whoever developed that application. And I thought in the future, if you take AI, if you take all this progress, that just didn't seem like sort of a good future. It felt like it was really important that you have like computers that are on your side and that kind of show you things in a way that you want and reflect your values and goals and ideas. And that just doesn't seem possible with the kind of existing tech paradigm. But then with Urbit, you could see that happening. So I think there was kind of that in terms of, especially around the user experience, that felt to me pretty crucial. In terms of crypto, I think there's a kind of a similar point where, if you see crypto today, right, people build all these cool dApps, DAOs, blockchains, and then people access it through, iOS apps or through Android or through Google Chrome or through all of those tools that are controlled by like these huge companies. And of course, crypto is like super disruptive and really threatening to a lot of existing, power structure. So, and at some point, it's just starting to happen, right? It's coming to a clash. And if we access all these tools through these huge companies that we don't control, this is not going to end well, right? So we need to have a different way of interfacing with crypto, and I think Urbit is that way.
Why doesn't crypto get us there? In other words, I mean, I guess it's kind of the whole theme of this panel. Maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but you can either answer it or just pass it. We can come back to the question. I mean, what I'm saying is I totally agree with your problem statement. I think everyone here would. But like, how far does crypto go in fixing this kind of problems you spoke about? And where does it fail such that we need Urbit as well, or instead?
Well, I think it fails especially on the sort of the user interface, or like the way people interact with these applications, right? Where you can have the DAO and the blockchain that is actually decentralized, but then people access it through, a web browser, web application that relies on, central API providers, relies on some sort of data indexing provider, relies on a lot of, is accessed on a mobile phone, which is kind of subject to the control by, Apple or Android. So I think it's in those places especially where you have like the fundamental level can be decentralized, but then the sort of way people access it is not.
Right. It's like, surprise, surprise, it's a Web 2 company that talks to the blockchain. We're still talking to centralized indexers. We're still talking to centralized reputation providers like Chainalysis. We're like still talking to centralized backends, talking to Postgres that also talk to Ethereum. It's like not a very holistic thing. And I think that UX thing really fell through. For me, like the excitement of Web3 is like it all just plugs together, right? You have the shared state, you have a shared identity that you bring with you to all these different things. But I think Galen talked about this with like the way dApps are built now. Your state is blown away when you go from one computer to another, one browser to another. That's like the Ethereum state is there, but everything else isn't. Your compute, your logic. And so it's like Urbit is that compute that ties it all together, and that UX is what I'm really excited about, where I can show up as my planet, have multiple planets for different personalities, and like have that tight integration that I was promised when I showed up to Web3 and was like, oh my God, let's make computers happy again.
So what was, Matt, what was your like initial Urbit rabbit hole moment? What kind of brought you into this community and caused you to stick around and hang out here?
Yeah, my call to Zod moment was, yeah.
Come to Zod moment, right?
Come to Zod moment, yeah. Was just the promise of a happy computer. I think somebody was wearing the shirt earlier, right? Like, let's make computers happy. I think that really speaks to me because if you, as a developer, like, it's all just so much sometimes, and it's really hard to express that if you've never written code, but it's all just so much all the time. And there's this really big promise of like, can we make a unified, pluggable, modular, interoperable to like a depth that I think we can imagine but haven't built in today's society? This like integration between our digital and our IRL lives, and this sort of like promise of smooth computing. But that's what got me in. And I was like, okay, cool. We get to right the wrongs of the past, redevelop from ground zero. Like, that's all very optimistic. And then seeing it happen over the last 4 years, it's insane. Yeah.
Jake, you want to share your come to Zod story?
Yes. So the general answer of why I'm here is I'm broadly very attracted to like weird, esoteric technologies with really big visions, driven by incredible teams. And as I said, we made the investment initially in 2016, but my come to Zod moment is actually happening like right now, because it was only really like this year that to me it became very, very clear that the conception of decentralized applications where they're only built on blockchains is just dramatically incorrect. And so what is really obvious from watching the crypto space is that a decentralized application is a very multifaceted thing. Obviously, it could involve smart contracts and some form of consensus, but it usually, more often than not, involves a community. It involves tooling that is not a blockchain. It involves things like communication technology. It involves tools like sentiment analysis, and so on and so forth. And the come to Zod moment this year has been that to really hit some of the goals that dApps want to hit, to be impactful in the world, to really disrupt industries, to build robust and large communities, to build a network state, right? To build a DAO. These goals cannot be done on a blockchain alone. Like that much is clear. Like I'm a member of many DAOs, including Flamingo DAO, Nouns DAO, and what I see in those DAOs is that most of the DAO activity is not on a blockchain. The blockchain is being used by a settlement layer. I also have historically been an investor in things like Aragon, like projects that make the case that actually most of a DAO's activity should be on a blockchain, and watching sort of the problems that creates, right? And so for me this year, the Come to Zod moment is that Urbit is a platform that ties these ideas together and gives communities, sort of an integrated environment where all of the functionalities of these like decentralized communities can come together in a coherent experience. And I think that's a winning combination. And just as a last point, from where I sit, Urbit has always been like not quite in crypto. We've been crypto adjacent. It's been, there's a lot of people like early in Urbit that were early in Bitcoin, but not as much like intersection with the Ethereum community, and not as much kind of explicit intersection with this idea of Web3. But what we're seeing this year, in my opinion, is a convergence of Urbit with Web3. And one of the reasons is that Urbit, even before Web3 kind of existed as a concept in like 2015 or so, Urbit really hit those points. And what's happening now is that this Urbit is kind of coming to market at a time when all of its features are very relevant as Web3 components. And that's why I'm here.
Hell yeah.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah. If I can piggyback off of your digital place statement around how it gives like communities the environment, I think that's one of the most powerful parts about this computer is that it understands digital ownership. And right now in the world, we don't have a digital space that understands identity, the network, the ownership of digital objects, which is important for identity and finance and all of this. None of that is unified right now. It's all very fractured. You don't get that integration. And specifically with NFTs, it's like we don't have an environment in which they can be meaningful. There's no digital wall for me to put things on that like satisfies the constraints of my human desires. It's the closest thing we have is the Twitter PFP. But I think a digitally native computer and these digital ownership aware spaces are that frontier. That is the space in which my ownership of this digital thing is relevant to my identity and importantly relevant to others who care about me and my self-expression. And I feel like that sort of that social layer is actually kind of huge for like digital ownership more broadly.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I also wanted to lean into what Jake said. I think it's a great foundation point from which we can kind of set off and explore the state of Web3 and the pieces of the puzzle that Urbit adds. So Jake, you mentioned being a member of several DAOs. I am as well. I've also seen this fragmentation effect, where like in order to operate a DAO or something like a DAO, or really any decentralized project, open source project, you need a dozen tools, plus or minus, right? You need Discord, you need GitHub, you need many Snapshot for voting, like all these kind of disparate tools that don't talk to one another. And it's hard enough if you have a standard set of those tools, which we kind of do. Like Discord is kind of the de facto, like real-time chat app for communities. But in fact, it's not that simple because even getting consensus among the community about which stack or set of tools to use, like that's challenging. And I've seen this in the communities I'm a part of. So I think it's interesting to look at precedent. And I think the best example here is Linux, right? When you have a standard, which Linux is, you have this notion, you then can have this notion of a standard distribution, right? And the idea is like it's a bundle of things that you get. Like if you use Ubuntu or Debian or Slackware, whatever your favorite Linux distribution is, out of the box you get this set of tools that are tried, tested, mature, they work well together. And I think that is hopefully the direction Urbit can go by providing this notion of a standard distribution. And then because it's open source and it's permissively licensed, to your point, people can fork it and tweak it, and that's why we have all these choices when we use Linux. Does that vision resonate for you guys?
Yeah. So like I mean, the Halium presentation kind of phrased it as app suites. We can also phrase this notion as a package manager or NPM or something like that, right? But I just want to give you like a very practical example. My dad is a trader. He loves trading. He trades gold. He trades stocks, whatever. He has a group online where he comes together with other folks with similar interests that they do trading. They learn technical analysis, right? And this group has a certain set of tools. Like they have a trading charting software where they could see the stock prices. They have a Zoom where they communicate and do like lessons and presentations. They have kind of a written notes portion. And on Urbit, what this might look like is that you have 4, 5, 6, or some number of applications that implement those communication modalities, but are all sort of packaged together, not only as an app suite, but also as a user experience. And notice that this is like a different thing than just an app. Like an app is a very specific thing for a very specific purpose, but an experience is like across apps, across communication modalities, and by participating in that set of apps, you are in this community, right? And so this idea that you can like bundle an experience together, and maybe even have a dedicated desktop experience and user experience for it, I think it's very powerful. And the other part of why it's really powerful is that when you want to take a community, like communities can be very large, they can involve like millions of people. How do you do an upgrade of this experience? And the answer is like if your community is a bunch of SaaS products that different people have to sign up for and it's like hard to coordinate, it's very difficult to do that upgrade. But what you could do with Urbit is like, okay, now we're gonna add an app to our app suite, and we can like one click update our whole community to this new experience, this new desktop, to a new communication modality, and so forth. And I frankly think that that is the killer app of Urbit as I see it right now. That's the integration experience.
So someone earlier referred to Urbit as a composability engine.
Yeah, composability factory.
That's composability factory. That was a great description.
I think that's
add that to your list of answers to the question of what is Urbit, which is quite a long list.
Right. Yeah, WeChat calls itself a lifestyle, right? It's a holistic experience of your life, which in WeChat's case is kind of dominating, but like that UX that it gives is insane. It's amazing. It's incredible. And I think what we can achieve with Urbit is something along those lines, where these tools are modular and work together. You have your identity, you have your community. It all works. It talks to the same protocols, that kind of thing. Yeah.
I think one huge difference between how this kind of thing can work on Urbit versus in crypto is in crypto. Let's say a lot of DAOs they start with some sort of token distribution, some kind of game theory, mechanics, incentives, decision-making structure, power structure, and then that's on chain, and then you have these other tools somewhere else, and then this kind of community emerges, and the community, and then this kind of the contract structure are in separate places, and the kind of keeping them in sync is hard. And of course, the other thing is that, often the community kind of gets organized after that power structure and the economic structure is already established. And, then often that leads to all kinds of issues. And I think in Urbit, it's like very well suited to have, what Jake said, right? To have these community tools and to evolve them, but then also for them to be like fully integrated, with whatever the crypto economics and token economics are, that can kind of evolve much more, naturally over time. And I think that's going to be like a huge deal. And if you think of most, let's say the Ethereum community, the Cosmos community, these very large crypto communities at this point, they're very like splintered in many different places, and there is of course alignment around certain ideas, but it's so hard to like coordinate them all and even to get like the attention of everybody. And I think Urbit's going to be super powerful for that.
Yeah, like earlier today, I asked Balaji, like, do you see network states as being primarily driven by social technology or digital technology? And his answer was social technology, but which I accept, right? But my question is, like, to get a community bootstrapped, like, what do you need? Like, do you need a really strong leader? Do you need like a manifesto?
You need a flag for sure.
Yeah. Do you need a flag? Do you need a DAO? Right. And to me, like one of the reasons I think that like the social and digital aspects interact here is because you can use digital technology, to your point, Brian, as a bootstrapping method for a new culture, a new group, a new community. Like on this stage was the observation that like 3 billion people use Facebook but with no culture, right? It's a completely missed opportunity to use technology like to bootstrap something like very powerful that has many people. It's totally missed opportunity. And I think what we'll be able to do with Urbit, with this idea of app suites or packages or desktops, is to really accelerate the building of very effective communities that have like strong cultural elements.
Maybe changing gears a little bit. We've been talking a lot about kind of composability, the community, the DAO side. I want to shift a little bit and discuss developer experience, because I think, selfishly, I'm a developer. I think we have a lot of like technically minded folks in the room. So Matt, kind of double clicking on something you said a few minutes ago about how difficult it is to like architect applications, especially dApps today. Also, Galen touched upon this. I think he said something along the lines of like, it just makes no sense the way that dApps are constructed today. And I'm just on a rampage quoting people here. I think it came up on the core dev panel earlier. Someone said writing Solidity is existentially stressful. I agree with that. I think writing any kind of like modern web applications feels existentially stressful. So a fun anecdote, right? People aren't really aware of this, but if you go back to the 1980s, right? Like kind of the 386 era, the pre-Windows, maybe kind of like around the early days of DOS. If you wanted to run an application, does anyone know how that worked, right? Like you would get a disk, you'd put it in the computer, you boot it up, and that disk had an operating system on it. In other words, the applications, the early like kind of, the early PC applications, they all came bundled with a freaking operating system on the disk because there wasn't like a common substrate, right? We didn't have these ABI formats down, and we didn't have like really programmable like OSs, like DOS and BASIC. These things came along just after this. It's kind of silly, right? Like everyone, like all the apps you're running had like hardware drivers embedded in them, like your spreadsheet, your word processor. And then what happened? And then of course, like Microsoft came around, DOS came around, all these kind of standards, libraries, et cetera, started to emerge. Unix, Linux, POSIX, all that stuff. And so we're kind of at this moment in the development of dApps where today they all build the whole freaking stack, which is just stupid, right? There's just like so much duplication going on. There's no like standards. So this is just me as a developer. My perspective on Urbit is it is that substrate. Right, like those applications, they need to plug into something so that they can share state, share data. So we have stateful UI, right? We have like Ethereum gives us the stateful backend, but we want to minimize the stuff we write to Ethereum because that's expensive. We want stateful front ends, and Urbit gives us that. Totally. Discuss.
Yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. And we're kind of getting that in the blockchain ecosystem right now with, I'm writing an app that does NFT auctions, and I've had to do basically zero work to make this happen. You talk to Zora, and now you have auctions. You talk to ENS, now you have usernames. You talk to, in the case of our case, a Web2 backend for chat, and now you have a chat. Like, that's sort of happening, but not to the extent that I'm imagining the Urbit ecosystem gives you. And that sort of like Urbit way of doing things We discovered this with like Golang, for example, and Go format, right? Like that was a productivity boon because no longer are we arguing over formatting. There's a very similar high-level thing going on here where things are written the Urbit way. And that's why I think the UI conversation that Palfin was having and yesterday as well is really important, is there's a balance between flexibility and this sort of like arbitrary nature of how to build something, which is amazing. You want to explore that. But also when you want to get down to it and actually build something, it's really, really nice to have those rails that do exactly what you want with the amount of flexibility you want. This is why things like Rails take off, like Rails for Ruby. It's like you want the convention over the building the Lego blocks. But of course, the explosion of experimentation is important to get there. And so I think one of the things we're getting is with the explosion of experimentation in the blockchain space, we can learn from that history. This is like very much the Urbit approach. Take the last X years, learn from it, condense it, do something new, and perfect it. And I think that we can do that at the dApp level now. I think that we can do that at the smart contract level now, right? If we start talking about like Uqbar, which I'm hyped for, I will be going to the technical Uqbar talk directly after this, right? Like you can write logic in your Urbit that has native bindings to your Uqbar smart contract to do whatever it is, send transactions, read data. It's all native in Hoon. That's insane. That's incredible. Right? And like when you piece this all together, you have identity, you have the social graph, you have the UI, you have all of this payments, ownership, all of it comes together. That is the like computing environment that I want to develop for. That's the computing environment that I want to use, and everything else feels sad in comparison.
Yeah, just to add a quick thought on like the Uqbar experiment, because I think it took me a while to understand this, but the notion of being able to write a smart contract in Hoon didn't immediately click for me, but what allowed it to click for me was like thinking, again, back to Web 2 and JavaScript, right? Like JavaScript is the second best language for everything. It's kind of crappy, but what it has going for it, aside from just being a very active ecosystem, is that you can build the full stack, front end logic, the actual UI of the front end, the back end, even sort of in some cases the smart contract part, depending on which platform you're using, like all in a single stack, all in JavaScript. You can do your IoT in JavaScript, et cetera. It means that your developers don't need to speak many languages, but it also means that like the pieces just fit together better. The data structures are similar. You don't like lose a lot of things when you're passing data because you can use JSON, which is like a native data format. So Hoon gives us this in the Urbit ecosystem, right? We have like the same language like throughout the stack. I think it's a very powerful idea.
Totally. Urbit fixes this.
Urbit fixes this.
Yeah, so I think there's sort of a related point that I've been thinking about a little bit, which is if you look at traditional web applications, people build traditional web applications, and integrating crypto into that generally hasn't really worked, right? Instead, they go and build decentralized app like from scratch. And I think with Urbit, at least my intuition is, for one, Hoon helps, that it's... Okay. But I also think the architecture of how Urbit apps work and that they're running like locally on everyone's chip will make it like way more natural to build some application that doesn't include any crypto incentives and tokens or anything like that. And then you add that later, and it makes the application more powerful without having to fundamentally change everything you were doing.
Totally, Lane. You brought this up when we were chatting earlier, but in the Bitcoin model of a multi-sig, right, the keys are exchanged P2P and then submitted on-chain for settlement. In the Ethereum model, it's all stateful on-chain, and you kind of bloat the state to do so. And it's actually kind of interesting that that was the way it was chosen, but when we were thinking about this, we were like, oh, the medium is the message in some sort of way here, where it's like Ethereum and thinking about, okay, I have to design a multi-sig for this environment. It lends itself to a specific implementation. And in the same way, when you get Urbit and you have this idea of every one of your users has a node that they can execute code in, that changes how you design protocols. It changes it. And I would argue that the balance is where the answer is. It's not all P2P with no shared state. It's not exclusively shared state. There's something in the middle, and that's where we'll find novel protocols that couldn't have happened before because you couldn't get people to run nodes and stuff like that. I'm sure you think about this a lot with Space Mesh as well.
Yeah, every day. Yeah, I think it's worth spending a moment to discuss consensus and kind of how it works, in the Web3 world and how it might work in an Urbit empowered future, right? So we got a very powerful primitive with Bitcoin and Ethereum, which is this notion of global consensus, right? This notion of decentralized global consensus. I mean, that's a fucking powerful thing that didn't exist before, and it gave us Bitcoin and it gave us, large parts of Ethereum and stuff, right? It's very powerful. But the thing is, it's all or nothing, right? It's very binary. And to your point about the multi-sig, I think this is a great example. The kind of Ethereum philosophy, for some reason, is to do things in a very stateful way, right? So in the case of Ethereum-style multi-sigs, like Gnosis Safe, for example, which probably many people here are familiar with, like all the key signing happens on-chain, right? So one key holder will submit a transaction, and then the others will kind of come along and approve or submit that transaction. That doesn't make any sense, right? I mean, it's wasteful. It wastes gas. It wastes storage. It's also, as I think you pointed out, it's bad for privacy, right? Because you can see details, you can see how many signatures there are, et cetera. Whereas in a Bitcoin world, or really in a sane world, those things would happen off-chain, and then just the final aggregated signature would be submitted to the chain to kind of execute the thing.
Totally.
So this is like how things have been done in Ethereum, but it's not how things should be done.
Totally.
Yeah, I want you guys to think about two use cases. One use case is global public money, so maybe like Bitcoin. And another use case is a wiki which is only accessible to the members of your 10-person startup. And so if you look at the wiki use case, and if you look at anything approaching that use case in Web3 today, it's very telling that that application is not generally implemented with a blockchain. That application might be implemented with a decentralized network. It might have its data live on Ceramic Network or IPFS. But where that data doesn't live is on Ethereum base layer, right? And what is the reason for that? It's way too expensive to do that. In fact, I think Dominic from Dfinity was like, do you know how much it takes to store a gigabyte of pictures on the Ethereum base layer? It's hundreds of millions of dollars. And so what this suggests is that there's this spectrum of applications that require different levels of consensus. For global public money, you want everybody in the world to agree on the contents of your wallet, of your ledger balance, right? And you want them to agree on everybody's balances as well. But when you have this much more private use case, much more local use case, the consensus needs only to be achieved among the 10 members of your team. And so this is sort of like what I was alluding to before, that there is actually not enough primitives in Web3 today to implement the full gamut of applications that you might want to implement. And in any case, if you were to try to implement a wiki type product on IPFS, it would be a little bit clunky today. And so what Urbit enables, in my opinion, or has the opportunity to really speak to, is all of the models of this kind of non-public, non-global consensus that you could achieve with a smaller number of participants, and just share state among essentially the Urbit ships that need to share it.
Look, this is a beautiful vision for the future. Let me try to tie a few of these threads together, the full stack, the Ukbar thing, the Hoon everywhere thing, as well as what Jake just mentioned, which is kind of consensus being a sliding scale rather than black or white. It's going to look like this in 10-ish years, maybe sooner if we build it, if we want it. And it's going to be freaking awesome, right? You're going to build an application as a developer. And it's going to be built using Hoon, let's say, right? This is an Urbit event. And it's going to look and feel normal. It's going to be monolithic in the sense that it's going to be a single code base. All the pieces are going to fit together, talk to each other. And then you're going to highlight, almost like imagine you have the code on the screen in front of you and you have a highlighter pen, right? You're going to highlight those few pieces that need consensus, which is not much, right? That's transacting coins or money or reputation. That's, to Jake's point, that's the wiki documents that this community needs to share. You're going to highlight them, And then the VM is going to figure it out for you, and it's going to achieve consensus on that piece, but not necessarily global consensus. You're going to have a sliding scale, right? You're going to say, okay, this is global money, this needs to go to maximum, this is just a shared document, and 100 or 1,000 people need to agree on the state of this. That's what programming is going to look like in 10 years, and it's going to be awesome, and Urbit gets us there.
That's pretty sick. I like that. Yeah, let the blockchain be good at what it does, which is digital scarcity, transferring that scarce thing from one person to another, and the logic of how that happens, and let everything else be on Urbit and P2P and settled on chain. Yeah.
And by the way, this trend is like bigger than Urbit. Like if you look out there in the market, you do see right now like peer-to-peer applications are kind of making a bit of a comeback. You might have heard about Keet, Keet.io, which is like a peer-to-peer like video conferencing software like Zoom or Google Meet, right? We have a company in our portfolio called Socket Supply, which is building, essentially a framework where people can develop peer-to-peer applications whose state lives on this like global decentralized hash table, right? And it has like permissioning scheme. And there's a bunch of other, you see like Matrix going from federated servers into like fully peer-to-peer, at least they're experimenting with that, right? And so there is like a renewed interest in peer-to-peer technology. But when I think about like Urbit, it's sort of one of the technologies in this space that has been in development like the longest.
Totally. And I feel like the pendulum may swing, we were all blockchain, no peer-to-peer, and now there's this like peer-to-peer revival, but the pendulum ends up in the middle eventually, where you want shared state, you want P2P compute, and they all are part of like a holistic way to compute. Yeah.
That was awesome. Okay, I think we need to spice things up a little bit. We had a beta name for this panel, which was the Web3 Darwin Awards. What are some like really dumb use cases you guys have seen for blockchain, global consensus, and as a means to illustrate the points we're making here about what blockchain is good for, what it shouldn't be used for?
One of my favorite themes of like the 2018 era were the like put all of your logic for this thing in a smart contract, which when you try to interact with them now, it's like you have to pay $100. Someone Sour Friend made a game that was basically Cookie Clicker on the blockchain, and if you want to play Cookie Clicker, it's going to cost you like $100,000 now because you have to execute this code over and over again. It's just like that sort of over-indexing was obviously made sense at the time because global state was cheap, but now is like kind of hilarious. And I've done that before.
Yeah, I kind of like alluded to this before, but there's some early DAO frameworks, for example, that have made the case that like every like organizational function of a DAO should be codified as a method on a smart contract, and should be like fully customizable. And we saw that strategy. That was like a 2017 era type of strategy. Yeah, like Aragon would be an example. And what we saw was that, there's a lot of problems with this approach. Like one problem is probably just kind of like due to the timing of the market. Like not a lot of people were willing to go and do a DAO at that time. Another problem was that of those people who were willing to do a DAO, they weren't in need of like deep customization. Because frankly, like a lot of the general technology around what a DAO is, including potentially like legal technology, in retrospect, wasn't like fully baked at the time. And finally, like kind of the most unfortunate aspect of it was just that the consequence of putting every DAO operation on chain means you got to pay for it, and means you have to have like consensus of the DAO. And so like these people who were in those types of organizations, found that something that was supposed to make their coordination easy and efficient actually hindered their coordination. Like it was like very difficult to do anything in a DAO of that form.
Over codifying like the processes and like
yeah.
Yeah.
And subsequently, like the market responded to that by saying, you know what, we're just going to move away from that and go to multi-sigs, where we're going to have all of our proposal discussions in a social layer, like on Discord, and then we're going to go to the multi-sig to settle this transaction on chain, and that's what a DAO is, right?
Totally, yeah, that's like the complete opposite. It's like, okay, none of the hard codification, all soft, like total flexibility. Yeah, it's like we're not going to codify any of these rules about like X ETH can be withdrawn per year, or this person has this permission. Like let that all be soft and on like a social consensus on top, and then settle with the multi-sig. Yeah, that is how the vast majority of DAOs work today. I think an exception might be like Nouns DAO, right, with like grant programs and tying grant expenditures to decisions on chain and stuff like that.
But even in Nouns DAO, like the on-chain primitives are like very simple. It's just like move money to this address when the vote completes.
It's amazing how much that is of DAOs. It's like Pleaser DAO, early days. Let's go Miami. Pleaser DAO early days did a lot of like custom transactions and shit. Nowadays we just pay people. That's all we do. We just send money to people as payroll. That's like the entirety of the DAO's operations. Yeah.
I mean, one thing that comes to my mind, sort of related to this question, is around the sort of the case for privacy. Yesterday there was in the hackathon, somebody showed this application, like a marketplace where there was like a product and you could sort of like message the seller for this product, and maybe there would be some sort of payment integrated. And if people built this on a blockchain, then kind of everything would be on the chain itself. And I think that, of course, there's different downsides. There is the downside of cost and scalability, but I think there's also a huge downside on the side of privacy. And we're probably not paying the cost for this yet, but that will come. I think that can come from, you have like companies like Chainalysis and the government, and, they can kind of like intervene in many different ways. And I think in Urbit, it will be much more natural to build applications where, like that marketplace is a good example, right? Where like, okay, just some planets hosting a marketplace, and, people are messaging, and maybe they're like buying this product, and the transaction happens, and maybe only that payment is on chain. And you won't be able to really see much just from the payment. And it'll be much easier to use, like privacy coins, and it will be very like smooth and natural, which is, I think, very, very different from the way on the blockchain it works. And when people try to put everything, in like privacy preserving smart contracts, then, I mean, it's not working yet. And I think this is also like, very hard technical challenge, and it comes with all kinds of other downsides. So I feel like privacy is probably the thing that we'll most look back on, and we're like, what were we doing?
Totally. We're going to look back and be fucking astonished that we put all this shit on chain. Like, oh my God.
Yeah, I think my favorite example of this is anything involving like health data. There have been a few of these. People are like, oh, let's just pool our data and throw it on chain, and it's cool because blockchain is private and it's encrypted. It's neither, actually. Healthcare data does not belong on a blockchain.
No, definitely not. I also think a lot of identity and reputation stuff should not be on chain. Like, you want this sort of P2P, decentralized identifier, verified credential type attestation thing, and all these, well, not all of them, there aren't a bunch anymore, but there was an era in blockchain where it was like your ID, like your NFT is your identity, and we attach your certifications to it in public. It's like, fuck that, that's horrible.
No, this is really interesting that you mentioned this, because this is a core primitive in Urbit, right? Like, if you read the wonderful pieces on the Urbit blog about like why Urbit address space has value, a big reason is because, well, obviously it's scarce, but also it has reputation associated with it, right?
Well, reputation is good, absolutely, and the PKI has to be on chain, but like attestations about who I am and what I've done and my qualifications, or like what someone thinks about me reputationally, none of that needs to be on chain, and really shouldn't be. It should be like, selectively disclosed. Like the whole DID VC model is an inspiration here. But yeah, there were a lot of like on-chain reputation experiments in the past, and that just like screams dystopia to me.
Okay, so you guys have probably heard the quote, "Software's eating the world." I think it was Mark Andreessen like 12 years ago or something. And then I think more recently people have begun to say like crypto is eating software, which I think we can all agree is kind of starting. So like 10 years in the future, imagine Urbit eats crypto. What does that look like, and is that like good or bad for the world?
Yeah, the Ukbar presentation had a good line. It was like, Urbit is becoming a crypto project, but more importantly, all of crypto is becoming an Urbit project. I thought that was sick. I gave him snaps for that. But yeah, no, absolutely. It's like the interface is what matters here. And it's like, yeah, storage and settlement and all that is awesome, but it's truly like what I want to do with it that matters here. And I do think Urbit as an interface eats computation. It eats how I interact with the machine. And I would love to live in a world in which, you know, I've painted this rosy picture of how Urbit might work. I want that world, you know?
By the way, on that, like at CoinFund, we recently saw a stat that last year it was something like 20% of new startups that were funded in the U.S. were crypto or crypto flavor kind of.
Wow.
Isn't an even larger percentage of like total VC dollars, or at least a few months ago?
Yeah.
More than 20% of it, I think, is flowing into crypto projects. It's a large number.
Exactly. So crypto is eating software like in significant ways right now. I don't know if like Urbit eats crypto or like what exactly.
It's a meme, Jake. Come on, it's a meme.
I just see like all of these things as different tools that we have in our toolkit to essentially create, efficient institutional technology. And when I say that, I mean institution in this like sort of broader abstract sense, which is like defining human behavior.
Yeah, the human coordination game is the real game here. It's like, how do we more effectively coordinate?
Yeah, exactly. Coordination is the game.
I forget that sometimes. It's a good reminder.
Slay Moloch.
Exactly, yeah. We're all out here trying to slay Moloch, and there are many different ways to do so.
Maybe just one thing that, so overall, I do think that's probably going to happen to, various degrees. Maybe one thing that is like a risk with that, though, is, in Urbit, you have like the entire computer, your state has like everything. It will have your chats, your assets, your data, like your applications, like absolutely everything. So I think just the scenario of, okay, this gets hacked is like super horrible, right? Like way more horrible than today people getting like their computer hacked or even their crypto assets stolen. And I think that's going to be a big, scary thing. Or including now, like, okay, you lose it, you don't have access to it anymore, like the kind of like, which is probably less of a danger because I think backups will be easier than preventing people from getting hacked. But I think that's going to be a big, or including, governments taking over, like, just getting your entire Urbit state, and then they have, everything on you.
This is kind of an interesting area to talk about. Like a lot of times people have put like blockchain technology forward as a, sort of state resistant technology or like a censorship resistant technology or a way of like doing government protests, right? But the reality of like Bitcoin is that if you're a criminal trying to do something like illegal on chain, you're actually like much worse off than if you were, using cash or something. And so, like as a privacy technology, blockchains aren't amazing yet. But on Urbit, like there's this like possibility of creating, secret societies that are like much more under the radar. So, like, what do you guys think of that aspect of Urbit as like a competitive vector to like other decentralization technologies?
I think this slots very well into the conversation we had earlier about consensus being all or nothing. Like, no, it should be a sliding scale. I think you said it just now, Jake. Like my favorite definition of privacy is selective disclosure, right? I don't want everything to be visible to everyone. That makes no sense, right? I want things to be shared with my community selectively. I think the Urbit model makes a lot of sense here. In fact, I can't imagine it working any other way.
I mean, if I'm going to start a secret society, I would do it on Urbit. That also assumes I haven't already. Shout out to those who know. But yeah, no, absolutely. I think to your point about security, your point about security is super valid. I mean, it's also a huge thing in the Web3 space, right? It's like, if you're going to have, yeah, the blockchain is secured with bank-grade crypto, but like, you are your own bank, and now you have to treat it like that. Like, that can be really, really tough, especially, you know, the UX of that whole experience. And once you really unify this sort of like IRL identity and URL identity, and my Urbit is my entire digital like container, losing that is so much more than losing an Instagram, right? Especially when it comes to digital assets, which are, you know, increasingly part of our lives. So yeah, that's really stressful. I don't know how reasonable or unreasonable it is to expect people to just be their own bank, you know? It might just be a cultural norm in the near future to back up Shamir secret share your keys and back them up with trusted friends. Maybe it becomes part of our culture to be like, oh, I'm a guardian for this person's digital life. Like, that's a very real cultural possibility, is that this becomes like a coming of age, like, oh, you're my best friend kind of thing. Like, here's my Horcrux, right? Like, that's legit. And
instead of being blood brothers, we're going to be like key brothers or
exactly.
something. Like, here's my shard. Give me your shard.
Totally. Yeah, that's intimate. Thank you.
Talk to me after.
Go.
So I think generally this problem exists and is pretty much the same in the crypto world and the Urbit world. But I want to add one thing. I think Urbit does have one thing going for it here, and that is the hierarchy and the hosting structure, right? So I think we're all aware at this point, like, the idea of a star in the future is that star will be like an ISP, right? It will offer hosted services to the planets under it, and the same kind of model applies at the galaxy level as well. And this happens a little bit today. There's some routing that goes on, and there's like over-the-air updates that are pushed this way, but that's kind of where it ends today. Like, this will be built out in the future. And look, Urbit is about choice, right? I think like most of us here want to be sovereign, want to manage our own keys. Maybe we have, a social sharing scheme. But some people want the bank experience. Some people want to know that there is like a trusted third party that, like, if they fuck up and lose their keys, like, that party can be trusted to restore them or something. And so I think that there could be stars that offer this as a service, and there could be people that choose to go that route.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, maybe even like a keep network type thing to like guarantee. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We have 5 minutes if we want to wrap up with anything.
Yeah, we're running short on time. Let me ask one more question, and then maybe we could take audience questions or whatever, with whatever time we have left. So I think we have sort of consensus on like the things blockchain is good at, the things Urbit is good at, what the interface between those look like. So I'm going to ask the elephant in the room question, the obvious question, which is like, what do we do about it, right? Like, how do we convince our Ethereum friends and our Cosmos friends and, you know, our friends in all these other like Web3 ecosystems to stop building dApps the dumb way and start building them on Urbit? Like, what can we do?
I mean, okay, I can go first. I mean, I think first of all, Urbit isn't quite ready. Like, we see, you know, the security thing is a big issue, right? Where you can install an app and it has access to all the states. So actually, you cannot build any crypto stuff on Urbit today. It would be like reckless. And you know, there's runtime stuff, and hosting isn't quite there yet. So I think if you sort of take the scale of community here and the developer engagement, and if you look at like the state of the technology, I think it's a sort of perfect balance, you know, where like hopefully, you know, we had like 80 apps that have been built so far. Of course, they're all like beta, immature and stuff, but that makes sense because the underlying platform isn't there yet. And I think a year from now, you know, hopefully the underlying platform is like more or less ready. But, you know, probably this will be like, you know, twice as many people, and there will be, instead of like 80 apps that have been built, there will be like 500 apps, and some of them will be more mature. So I don't feel like it's an issue right now. It's a sort of like, you know, try to get crypto people to build Urbit apps. I think it will naturally happen, and I think the amount of developer activity is perfectly right for where we're at.
Yeah.
I think like from my perspective, I'm big on like putting theory into practice, like in crypto /Web3, especially on the investor level. We spend a lot of time in theory, like what is Web3, what are the tenets of Web3, what are blockchains used for, what are they good for, and perhaps like not enough time actually demonstrating how the products that come out of these technologies actually change the world, actually create communities, actually do something useful beyond, like scarce cat pictures on blockchains and things like that. And so, like, again, to me, like this whole game is coordination technology. It's like building better institutions. It's fixing some institutional failures that we've seen. It's creating alternatives that, maybe do things better than or offer services that better than governments, And what I really want to see is people putting those ideas into practice. And because I think that Urbit is actually kind of the closest thing in the market where you can put those ideas into practice, I think it's a little bit about demonstrating to Web3 crypto people why things like these integrated experiences and app suites on Urbit are actually solving their Web3 goals and facilitating the convergence of Urbit and Web3.
Totally. I think it starts really small with communities like that want to, if you want to have a group chat with a bank account, well, in this case, a crypto account, but write custom software for it. Maybe you're your dad's trading friends on Zoom and everything. A very small community self-tailoring software for themselves and integrating that with digital ownership, I think is the way it starts. And apps can be a homegrown meal, and I think the promise of Urbit is that it's easier than ever to modify your computing environment to build something that 1, 2, 3 people use, and that's okay and awesome. I think that's how it starts, is very small.
Small computing for the win. All right.
Nice.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 quick audience questions, if there's any burning questions.
Hello. You said coordinating people was the big question, big challenge. How would you go about it?
Sorry, say it again.
You said coordinating people is the big challenge. How would you go about it?
How about to go attacking that problem of human coordination? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it feels like we as people are the sense of cells that coordinate and form a single identity. But then as soon as you extrapolate that to 2, it's, coordination gets harder, and 3, and n squared, and now you have nation states, and now you have wars. It seems like it breaks down over time or over scale for me. That feels like if we can change the delta with which that breaks down, whether that's more efficiency, more automation, I don't quite know. I'm sure someone like Balaji has a lot of takes on this. But if you decrease the degree to which coordination degrades over scale, you exponentially increase the scale by which we can grow and can coordinate. And I think that's probably the lever to turn. I don't know how that gets down into software, though.
Well, we've got Urbit, so.
Yeah.
Let me just interrupt again. So you guys can keep going as long as you want, because there's nothing on the stage afterwards.
Okay.
But the rest of you should know that the Tyrell talk is starting on that stage in about a minute, and the how to write UKBAR contracts on this stage.
Well, I want to go to
either
the
of those.
UKBAR.
Okay, well, there you go.
Okay.
So time to wrap. Cheers.
Thank you guys so much. That was
Thank
a
you
lot
so
of
much.
fun. Very enlightening.